No one walked into Professor Delcan's lecture hall for the first time and felt comfortable. That was not an accident. The room was built from smooth stone-gray material that curved upward in a long, cathedral arc. Walls that didn't so much contain the space as compress it, funneling attention downward toward the stage the way a funnel funnels water. Inevitably, without asking permission, the ceiling hummed at a frequency just below conscious awareness. The sound of climate systems maintaining precise atmospheric conditions for serene biology. The lighting ran at a spectrum that slightly desaturated the colors of anyone who wasn't serene, making the students in the upper rows look slightly less real than the professor standing at the front of it all, which Yeva had always privately suspected was not entirely unintentional. 63 students filled the tiered rows that morning. 9 different species, drawn together by the galaxy's ongoing and somewhat reluctant experiment in interspecies education. They had arrived from separate dormitory wings, separate dining halls, separate physiological preferences, and they had all sat down in this particular hall on this particular morning because the course catalog had described it as planetary classification and biological threat assessment, and that had sounded manageable. It had not prepared them for this. It never did. Professor Delcan adjusted the holographic projector with the practiced calm of a man who had done this exact thing 41 times, on 41 mornings across 22 years of a career that had made him, in the private estimation of the Vorhei Academy faculty, the most consistently illuminating and consistently terrifying educator on the staff. Pale blue skin, gold freckles, scattered across sharp cheekbones, like a constellation someone had thrown carelessly and then decided to leave. A narrow structural ridge where a human nose would have been, and his eyes, silver, absolutely still. The kind of eyes that had catalogued more of the galaxy than most admirals twice, his age, and had never once, in all of that witnessing, seemed particularly impressed. 3 amber rank lights on his collar. In the Serene academic hierarchy, 3 amber lights meant, you do not challenge this person unless you are fully prepared for what follows. The student evaluation forms called him thorough, brilliant, somewhat terrifying. He had read those evaluations once, found them accurate, and filed them. The course had an official name. No one used it. Everyone at Vorhei Academy knew this. Class by the name that moved through dormitory corridors and shuttle bays and dining halls in the low, slightly reverent tones reserved for things that were both anticipated and dreaded. The Death World Lecture, the one where Delcan pulled up the Class 7 and Class 8 planetary registry, a world so hostile, so cosmically, almost personally aggressive toward complex life, that the classification system had essentially created an entire separate category, just to flag them, and let the room sit with the list in complete silence. No narration, no explanation, just the list glowing above the stage, while students from 9 species sat with their thoughts and their biology and their mounting private gratitude that they came from somewhere else. Then he would begin, and it would get worse, and somehow inexplicably more fascinating. This was the morning it went differently. The projector bloomed. A sphere materialized above the stage, and massive, luminous, so achingly, deceptively beautiful, that several students in the upper tiers instinctively leaned forward. Blue oceans consumed most of its surface, deep and ancient and vast, interrupted only by land masses that clung to the remainders like they were holding on. White cloud systems spiraled in long, slow arcs. From this distance, from this angle, it looked like something designed to be inhabited. It looked hospitable. It looked safe. Designation UX-37, Delcan said. His voice carried zero inflection. Zero drama. The tone of a man reading coordinates into a nav system. Common name Earth classification. Class 7 Death World. Primary intelligent species Homo sapiens. Currently registered as allied observers under the Interstellar Compact. Somewhere near the back of the hall a student laughed. Not loudly, just the small, involuntary sound a body makes when it receives information the brain hasn't fully processed yet. The laugh of someone who had looked at the data and needed a moment. Delcan did not look up. Go ahead, he said. It is an appropriate reaction. 3rd row, left side. Yeva Malone had been awake since before dawn, which was not unusual for her. But this particular morning she had spent the pre-dawn hours redoing her braid. Dark hair pulled tight, looped back, and she had been doing and undoing it since the shuttle ride over because her hands needed something to do when her mind was moving too fast, and her mind had been moving fast since she woke up. Since yesterday. Since the moment she first saw this lecture on the course schedule and felt that specific bright surge of anticipation she associated with things that actually mattered. She was 19 years old. Born in Kraków, Poland, in a city with a history so dense you could almost feel it in the stone under your feet, in the particular quality of winter light through old windows, brown eyes, sharp cheekbones, the kind of quiet that read to people who knew her, not as passive but as waiting, like a sentence that hasn't reached its verb yet. She was one of 4 humans enrolled at Vorhei Academy that semester. She had recently become aware, the youngest student in this specific lecture hall by a margin. That had felt flattering when she first learned it and felt considerably more exposed now that she was actually sitting inside it. 2 weeks ago, over a long-distance comm call full of signal delay and her mother's characteristic mixture of warmth and urgency, she had said that comparative planetology was going to be her favorite subject. She had been glowing when she said it. Genuinely, unguardedly excited, the specific kind of excitement that only arrives when you are somewhere new and everything still feels like it is about to become something. Now she sat in the third row, watching a holographic version of her home world rotate slowly above her head, and listened to one of the most distinguished academics in the known galaxy dismantle it. Piece by piece, calmly, with citations, 71% of the surface, Delcan said, moving to the first data slide with the unhurried precision of a surgeon opening a patient he has, operated on many times before, is covered in saline water at depths reaching 11 kilometers. The remaining landmass is distributed across tectonic plates in constant lateral motion, producing seismic events, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis on a regular and predictable cycle. He advanced the slide. The atmosphere at ground level contains sufficient oxidizing agents to corrode unprotected metal alloys within weeks. Pause. The temperature range across a single inhabited planetary year spans from -80 degrees Celsius to +56. I want to be specific. These temperatures are not recorded in extreme or polar zones. They are recorded in inhabited ones. The lecture hall had developed the particular stillness of a room in which people are being careful not to move, as if movement might draw something's attention. Delcan did not pause for it. He kept going. The Megafauna, species capable of dismembering most registered sentient beings with minimal structural effort. The insects, small, seemingly inconsequential, smaller than his thumb, carrying neurological diseases with mortality rates that made several students quietly recheck the classification on their data pads. Then the plants. He stopped on the plants just long enough for the word to achieve its full weight. Plants that produce contact toxins, capable of triggering systemic organ failure in 7 of 9 registered alien species. Stationary organisms, he noted. They do not pursue. They do not need to. 3 seats to Yeva's left. A Thoraxian student named Oren, bronze-skinned, thin facial ridges running along his jaw in clean parallel lines, leaned toward his neighbor and said something low. Both of them turned briefly to look at her. Not cruelly, not with mockery. With the specific helpless fascination of people who have just learned something strange and impossible about someone they have been sitting next to for weeks, like discovering quietly that a classmate you thought you understood had been shaped by something you had no framework for. Yeva held her face very still. She had practice at this. Atmospheric storms. Delcan moved through them with the unhurried pace of a tour guide, narrating a mildly interesting geological formation. A hurricane, described in terms of rotational velocity and pressure differential, with no particular alarm, as if the alarm were so obvious it didn't require expression. A tornado, concentrated rotational column events, he called them, which was accurate in the way that calling a fire a rapid oxidization event was accurate. Technically correct, emotionally insufficient. Hail, which he classified as, and here he used this phrase, with the flat precision of someone who had genuinely thought it was the, clearest way to say it. Random projectile precipitation. Quiet noises moved through the hall like a slow wave. Not panic, something closer to a collective ongoing reassessment. Then Delcan reached the moon. He paused, half a beat, barely perceptible. The kind of pause that only exists because even after 41 lectures, 22 years, all those silver-eyed mornings standing at the front of this room, something about this particular fact still managed to catch him slightly off guard, as if the data still contained something that resisted full absorption. The gravitational relationship between Earth and its natural satellite, he said, produces tidal forces that actively reshape coastal geography twice per planetary day. This is not in itself unusual. What is unusual? He looked up. Voluntarily, which he almost never did before the question period, is that the Homo sapiens did not evolve in sheltered habitat zones. They did not develop in isolated pockets of tolerable microclimate. They evolved on the open surface of this world, breathing the oxidizing atmosphere, consuming groundwater from sources adjacent to saline contamination, coexisting with the megafauna listed on slide 4. Oren's hand went up. Professor, when you say coexisting, you mean they developed protective technology to manage the fauna early in their development? No, Delcan's voice didn't shift. For the majority of their evolutionary history, they possessed no technology. By the standards of this classification system, they were prey animals, mid-tier prey animals. He moved to the comparative biology slide. No natural armor, no venom, no enhanced musculature relative to their primary predators. Slow on open terrain. No functional low-light vision. Singular digestive organ. He stopped. He let it sit. One stomach, he said again. He always said it twice. Because it always deserved to be said twice. In the third row, Yeva had stopped taking notes. Her pen had been still for 6 minutes. Her notebook was open to a page that contained, instead of lecture content, a small and carefully written list and items assembled point by point in the neat, slightly compressed handwriting she used when she was trying to keep something contained. Things she wanted to say. Arguments she had built quietly inside herself. The way you build something when you're not sure yet whether you're actually going to use it. She was absolutely not going to raise her hand. She was 19 years old. He had 3 amber lights and 22 years. This was not a situation where standing up and saying, "Actually, Professor," was something you did. She drew a small bracket around the list. She underlined one item. She put the pen down. Then Professor Delcan moved to a slide she hadn't expected. Not megafauna, not atmospheric events, not tectonic data, something else, something that arrived in the middle of all the cold, empirical devastation and landed differently. Population growth curves, conflict indices, early expansion timelines. Humanity, he said, began their interstellar program while simultaneously engaged in multiple active planetary wars, not historical conflicts, concurrent ones. He let the class build the image themselves. They launched their first crewed vessel toward their own moon, while 2 of their largest geopolitical factions were positioning nuclear weapons at each other across continental distances. The conflict did not halt the program. The program did not dissolve the conflict. He paused. Both, he said, simply continued. The laugh from the back row came again. Louder this time. Not the nervous laugh of before, something rawer, something almost like awe wearing the wrong face. Yeva put her pen down. She picked it back up. She put it down again. And then, without a committee, without a plan, without the permission of any part of herself that was still keeping careful track of amber rank, lights, and the 19 years between her birth and this morning, she raised her hand. The room went so completely still that she could hear the ceiling hum. Delcan looked at her. In 22 years, 1 student had raised a hand before the designated question. Period. 1. He looked at her. The way you look at something that doesn't fit the model you arrived with. Not with irritation, not with condescension, but with the very particular attention of a scientist who has just observed something the data didn't predict and knows immediately that it matters. Yes, he said. Yeva Malone stood up. On Earth, when you had something important to say, you stood. She didn't know if that was universal or human or Polish or just hers. It didn't matter anymore, Professor, she said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her. With respect, you have described my planet as a place that should not support civilization. You've described my species as prey animals who survived conditions they had no biological right to survive. She held his gaze. And you are not wrong about the data. But I think you are describing the context and calling it the story. Delcan said nothing. His silver eyes were completely unreadably still. The megafauna, she said. The storms. The tectonic shifts. The toxins in the oxidizing air in the 11-kilometer oceans. None of that is what this data is about. All of that is just the stage. The actual story is that something looked at all of it, all of that, and decided somewhere in the deep, dark before fire, before language, before any tool or shelter or organized thought, that it was going to stay. And figure it out. The hall was a held breath wearing a room's shape. What? Delcan said after a moment in which nothing moved. Is your name? Yeva Malone. She did not sit down. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to his curriculum file and began to type. He typed without looking up. Miss Malone, he said, sit down. We will return to your point. I want the class to see where it leads. She sat. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it behind her eyes. Oren turned, slowly. Not to look at her the way he had before. Not with that fascinated, disoriented study of something strange. With something different. Something older. Something that lived in the part of a person that goes quiet when it recognizes something real. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know that in the next 30 minutes, this room was going to rearrange something in 62 students from 8 different species. She didn't know that Professor Delcan was about to do something he hadn't done in 22 years of standing at the front of this hall. She only knew that something enormous and quiet had moved, that the room had shifted. Around a single sentence the way a compass shifts around north, that she had said something that needed to be said, and that on the world, rotating slowly above her head, the world of storms and pressure and 100,000 years of refusing to stop. That was always how it had started. The galaxy had no idea what was sitting in that lecture hall. It was about to find out.